To my absolute horrified and utter shame, the government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is going to resume paying jizya to the UNRWA. And David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, is putting out all sorts of announcements on social media to justify his horrendously poor judgment. I know it's out on Instagram and I know it's out on Twitter. But while he justifies the 21 million he's sending to UNRWA, I'll bet he hopes we've forgotten that only last week he rushed to donate to the relief fund for the Caribbean islands affected by Hurricane Beryl. Yeah. The magnanimous British government really went to bat for those guys in Grenada, St Vincent, the Grenadines and Barbados, and Carriacou and Petite Martinique, where 95% of all houses were destroyed through absolutely no fault of the residents there. They didn't declare war on anyone. Yes, it's £21 million for Hamas. UNRWA. And for the Caribbean, £500,000. £500,000. Our government really knows where its priorities lie, doesn't it? I'm granniopteryx. So let's play this.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is devastating. Mothers are unable to feed their children.
Last week, the United Nations World Food Programme said the threat of famine in Gaza never loomed larger, while the New York Times asked how food and medicine will enter and be distributed across Gaza. But why then were there hundreds of sleeping trucks with undistributed humanitarian aid at the Kerem Shalom crossing when I visited Israel to investigate the situation of humanitarian assistance? Sleeping trucks is the term used to describe Israeli-inspected vehicles filled with food and humanitarian supplies that have been transferred to the Palestinian side of the crossing but are not picked up by international aid organisations to distribute to Gaza civilians. One of the primary distribution culprits is UNRWA, the UN agency infected with Hamas. UNRWA's former General Counsel James Lindsay told the House Foreign Affairs Committee last week that UNRWA's leadership is incompetent and willfully obstructionist and has made no serious efforts to avoid hiring terrorists. It would not be surprising to learn that as many as half of the UNRWA's employees were Hamas supporters. Which means that however much aid you give them, it's going to end up in this sort of problem. I'm sure Mr. Lammy could manage to read the whole article. I mean, that was only part of it. And I'm sure he could manage to read the whole article, the better to inform himself about the usefulness of aid to an organisation like UNRWA. And then that article isn't too difficult to read. It doesn't have too many long words. Hey, what am I saying? He's a government minister now, isn't he? I'm sure he could get a secretary to read it out for him. Anyway, to push on to his next point.
Families are forced to flee their homes many times.
Forced to flee many times, which is because Hamas has dug itself under houses, schools and public buildings, so the Israelis have to tell the population to move. So these underground cities they built with all the aid they'd previously got can be dealt with. All of this comes from Hamas, and Hamas is with UNRWA like that. When you give money to UNRWA, you might as well just stick it into an envelope address it to Yahya Sinwar, and hand it to anyone in Rafah with an AK-47 and staring Captagon eyes. All right, let's carry on.
More aid workers killed than in any other conflict.
More aid workers are killed than in any other conflict. According to Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, let's have a look at what he said. 195 UNRWA staff members have been killed, the highest staff death toll in UN history. I suppose he means the sort of UNRWA staff who participated in the October 7th pogrom, and the sort of UNRWA staff who held hostages in their homes. Most of those were killed in combat, weren't they? Right, I went on a little bit, so let's... An entire population at risk of famine. So now he's saying, I hope you notice, now they're at risk of famine. At the beginning of the video, it was actual famine, wasn't it? And that was only a couple of minutes ago. Mothers can't feed their children, he said, so far as I remember. Obviously, Mr. Lammy doesn't remember that, though. Look, I'm not saying that the situation there is great for the innocent civilians. Well, for a start, some of those civilians aren't all that innocent, but they are civilians, so there's not a lot to be done about that. But giving money to UNRWA, just a minute. Yeah, that's right. But giving money to UNRWA, aka Hamas, as the previous head of it said, about half of them are most likely Hamas operatives. That is just prolonging the torture. You keep Hamas going, you keep this going, and Hamas aren't only going for Israelis, they're going for any local Arab who disagrees with them. You know, I'm having trouble working out whether Mr. Lammy is an evil bastard or an idiot. I always thought he was an idiot. But you know what? I'm coming round to the idea he might actually be an evil bastard after all. Right, let's carry on.
On humanitarian assistance. That's why we are lifting the pause on funding to UNRWA today. UNRWA is the only agency that can deliver humanitarian aid at the scale...
It says here, the UNRWA is the only agency that can deliver. Well, hang on, let's go on. Let's see what he says they can deliver. Humanitarian aid at the scale needed in Gaza. That's not true. That's just simply provably not true. The UN Agency for Refugees is UNHCR. Right. UNHCR got a budget of $10 billion in 2023. I'm interrupting myself because I forgot to make the important point that the $10 billion UNHCR get are $10 billion for the whole world, refugees all over the world. The UNRWA budget, which is $1.5 billion, is just for the West Bank and Gaza, and mostly Gaza. Don't you think there's a little bit of a disproportion there? Okay. The amount of money poured into that sink is absolutely just mind-boggling. Every citizen of Gaza should be driving a gold-plated Rolls-Royce at that rate, but all the money went into those tunnels instead, and with the help of UNRWA, which is an organisation which was, in 1949, set up specifically and only for the Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza. And in what way is that not jizya? There's a unit, there's an agency for all the world, for refugees throughout the world, but the Arabs in the UN insisted that there's one specific agency for the West Bank and Gaza. And they were not putting money into it. Well, they were, but the whole world was putting money into it first, just specifically for those Arabs. Is that not jizya? And it's being paid by poor African countries as well as European countries. The whole thing should be wound up. The UNHCR, if I've got the initials the right way round, the proper refugee agency, is the only one that's needed. And yeah, okay, this video, I'm not going to go any further. This video is getting rather long, and in any case, I think I've made my point. You can find the rest of it online really easily if you're that interested. But the way that Lammy is approaching this, you can see he is, he's saying things which are demonstrably not true. That is activism, not politics. And he's using your money in the service of that activism. Right, and yeah, well, I'm going to stop there. In any case, I'm getting really sickened by watching that dreadful man's self-satisfied face as he justifies spending British taxpayers' money propping up a bunch of gangsters. So, while we Brits here digest that along with our Sunday lunch, I'll say till next time. You can help my channel by clicking like, by subscribing, by clicking the notification bell, and by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels are in the description, also links to donation sites, but really the best way you can help me is simply by clicking like. Thank you.